This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Grace Shin. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. The death toll climbs in southern China after days of flooding, while Typhoon Bavi threatens fresh destruction. Extreme weather also lashes South Korea with flooding and evacuations following torrential monsoon rains. Plus, South Korea's President Myung on a state visit to Mongolia, striking deals on minerals and energy, while seeking a diplomatic helping hand to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. Apple supplier Luxshare lands Hong Kong's biggest IPO of the year, but a weak market debut suggests investors are putting valuations ahead of first-day gains. Also tonight, what if artificial intelligence could copy your voice without permission? One Chinese actor says it's already happened, sparking debate over creative work in the AI era. Southern China is battling a worsening flood disaster, with the death toll climbing to 39. Days of relentless rain brought by Storm Maysak have caused rivers to overflow and inundate cities across southern Guangxi. More than 130,000 people have been forced to flee their homes. Officials say 26 people were killed when a dam at the Liulan Reservoir suffered a breach in the regional capital of Nanning. And floodwaters continue to swamp communities and disrupt transport. Rescue efforts have intensified as thousands of emergency personnel, along with drones and boats, have been deployed to reach stranded residents and deliver food, drinking water, and medical supplies. In Guangxi, more than 130 rescue workers have been mobilized after a damaged river embankment left nearby villages underwater. Military rescue teams have evacuated more than 280 residents. Authorities have also evacuated thousands of students trapped inside a flood-hit education park also in Guangxi, with several thousand still needing evacuation. Now, floodwater submerged school buildings and cut off electricity, water, and internet services. And even as southern China battles devastating floods, another powerful storm is closing in. That's Typhoon Bavi, which is forecast to pass close to Taiwan tomorrow. That is before making landfall along China's southeastern coast this weekend. And Taiwan's Central Weather Administration has issued a sea warning this afternoon, and a land warning is expected later today or even early tomorrow morning. The storm is packing maximum sustained winds of around 184 kilometers an hour. And for the latest, CNA senior correspondent Victoria Jen joins us live in Taipei. Victoria, tell us more about the situation right now and how Taiwan is preparing for Typhoon Bavi.
Well, Taiwan is now in full preparation mode as Typhoon Bavi moves closer. Now, authorities warn that Bavi is a very large storm with a radius of 380 kilometers. It's one of the biggest typhoons to hit Taiwan in decades. So even if its center stays offshore, much of Taiwan could still experience the impact of the storm. So the government is not taking any chances. Nearly 30,000 military personnel have been placed on standby for evacuations and rescue operations. Local governments have also been clearing drains, preparing emergency shelters, and getting ready to evacuate residents in high-risk areas if necessary. Now, Taiwan's critical infrastructure is also gearing up. Taiwan Power Company has more than 7,000 workers on standby, along with repair vehicles, heavy equipment, and backup generators, so power can be restored quickly if the grid is damaged. Now, residents are also being urged to stock up on food, water, and other essentials, and avoid coastal areas as conditions begin to deteriorate.
So much preparation is underway, but just how much disruption is Taiwan expecting, and what are authorities most concerned about?
Well, some disruption has already begun, and it's expected to increase over the next 48 hours. Ferry services to several offshore islands have already been suspended. Airlines are allowing passengers to change or cancel flights, and more domestic flight cancellations and mountain road closures are expected as the weather deteriorates. Fishermen have also been urged to avoid heading out to sea, with forecasters warning of dangerous waves and rough seas around Taiwan's coast.
你台风要是从那个日本那个宫古岛那边过去，对宜兰就不会影响。你要是偏南的话，从宜兰登陆的话，整个台湾影响都很大。这个台风因为它那个风速可能到17级17级真的连树都拔掉了，很恐怖啊！尽量就有空就来看。
Authorities say their biggest concern is actually the rain. Forecasts showed some mountainous parts of Taiwan could receive more than 1 meter of rainfall from Friday into Saturday. Taiwan's steep mountains make the island especially vulnerable to flash floods and landslides. Now, those hazards have caused some of the deadliest damage during the past typhoons. So officials are closely monitoring high-risk communities and are ready to carry out precautionary evacuations if conditions worsen.
All right, thank you so much for those updates. That was CNA senior correspondent Victoria Jen reporting live in Taipei. South Korea, too, is grappling with a bout of extreme weather. Overnight monsoon rain has battered the country's central regions, triggering floods and forcing hundreds from their homes. Authorities say one person is missing and more than 420 residents have been evacuated. More than 200 cases of damage to public and private property have also been reported. In the worst-hit areas, more than 130 millimeters of rain fell in just 8 hours. Rivers burst their banks, flooding homes and prompting emergency rescues. And the downpour also disrupted transport. Flooded roads affected buses, while some train services were suspended. The state weather agency has issued flood and landslide advisories across the country. Authorities have also stepped up monitoring in flood and landslide-prone areas, but forecasters warn more rain is on the way. And we have more flood-related coverage on CNA's TikTok channel. In China's Guangxi region, an excavator was used to rescue pigs swept away by floodwaters, helping villagers recover the animals and return them to their owners. Also, in Guangxi, around 900 snakes, including venomous cobras, escaped from a farm after flooding. Authorities are urging residents to take precautions as efforts continue to recover the reptiles. And officials, according to local media, say anti-venom supplies are adequate. Switching gears, South Korea and Mongolia are deepening ties with a broad push for closer cooperation with deals signed in key sectors as South Korean President Lee Myung held his first summit with his Mongolian counterpart. Mr. Lee is on a 3-day state visit to Mongolia, and the countries have inked 21 cooperation agreements covering critical minerals and energy. The leaders also discussed peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and across Northeast Asia. Mr. Lee said the meeting marks a new chapter in bilateral ties, adding that it would usher a golden era of cooperation. Mongolia's president described South Korea as its third neighbor and a key strategic partner, while also calling for deeper political trust and economic cooperation. And for more, CNA senior correspondent Lee Myung joins us live from Seoul. Yeon-suk, this is Mr. Lee's first overseas state visit to Mongolia and the first for a South Korean president to visit the country in 15 years. Could you tell us the significance behind why Lee Myung went there now and to Mongolia?
Well, this visit is about much more than symbolism, I think, because it seems to have real strategic substance. Well, yes, President Lee Jae-myung became the first South Korean president in 15 years to make this state visit to Mongolia, and he also traveled there earlier in his presidency than any of his predecessors. Now, that alone signals that South Korea wants to elevate this relationship. But the real substance and, the significance lies in what came out of that summit. President Lee Jae-myung described the adoption of this joint declaration as the summit's biggest achievement because it lays out a shared vision for what both leaders are calling a golden era of South Korea-Mongolia relations and serves as a roadmap for deepening ties built on more than 30 years of friendship and trust. Now, economically, Mongolia is becoming increasingly important for South Korea because Mongolia has abundant critical minerals that are essential for batteries and semiconductors and other high-tech industries, making supply chain cooperation a strategic priority. Now, building on an agreement in principle for a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, the two sides also set a goal of increasing bilateral trade to $1 billion by 2030. But the partnership really goes beyond natural resources. The two countries agreed to expand cooperation in AI, digital transformation, technology, logistics, agricultural, livestock, and healthcare. And President Lee Jae-myung also signaled out the second National Cancer Center project as one initiative that could deliver tangible results for the Mongolian people. Now, the two sides also agreed to broaden their cooperation in areas like tourism, education, employment, and cultural exchanges, while, they agreed on increasing their political dialogue on regional and global issues.
Right, cooperation on many fields, starting from critical minerals all the way to geopolitics. And speaking of, what kind of role can Mongolia play when it comes to South Korea's relations with the North?
Well, this was probably one of the most sensitive issues discussed during that summit, and President Lee Jae-myung was careful not to overstate Mongolia's role. Now, the most concrete outcome was that the Mongolian leader reaffirmed his support for peace on the Korean Peninsula, something the South Korean president publicly thanked him for during that joint press announcement. And that's because Mongolia occupies this unique position in Northeast Asia. It shares democratic values and close ties with South Korea, but at the same time, it does maintain diplomatic relations and this long-standing communication with North Korea. Also, it has balanced relationships, with China and also Russia. And so the South Korean leader, Lee Jae-myung, is not asking Mongolia to play this role of a mediating role in trying to get the two Koreas together or any kind of dialogue, even between Washington and Pyongyang. But I think what South Korean President Lee Jae-myung wants to do is he's seeing Mongolia as this trusted partner that can help preserve communication channels, especially at a time when dialogue between the two Koreas and between Pyongyang and Washington has largely stalled.
Many thanks for those updates. That was CNA's senior correspondent Lee Myung reporting live from Seoul. And we'll head out for a short break, but coming up on East Asia Tonight, South Korea gets a major economic boost as the IMF sharply raises its growth forecast. China's economy is showing a widening divide with an AI-powered export boom masking persistent weakness in consumer spending, investment, and the property sector. Hi again. It's time for your business news with Roland Lim. Roland, China factory gates chomping at the bit yet again, right?
You are right, Grace. It's up 4 months in a row and a leading indicator of inflationary pressure in the Chinese economy. This is despite a temporary easing of the U.S.-Iran conflict. Now, China's inflation split continues to widen as consumer prices again fell last month, while producer inflation, that surged to its highest level in 4 years. The consumer price index fell to 1% in June, compared with a gain of 1.2% in May. Producer prices, meanwhile, ticked higher to 4.1% as global commodity costs surge. Analysts say weak domestic demand is preventing producers from passing on the cost to consumers. Experts say the economy is developing a two-track dynamic as a global AI-fueled export surge is lifting advanced manufacturing, while weak household spending, lackluster investment, and the property downturn continue to restrain domestic activity. Evidence of subdued domestic demand has been underscored by auto sales, which fell for a 9th consecutive month in June, prompting car makers to turn to external markets. The Greater China markets held on to gains as a rally in chip makers and AI-linked shares eased concerns of the mixed data, while Hong Kong equities, well, that declined today by 0.7%. Now, China may be back on investors' radar, but the rebound is still uneven. Beijing has been stepping up support for Hong Kong's capital markets recently. At the same time, investors are watching whether China's recovery can broaden beyond industrial strength and technology. Now, I spoke earlier with Fred Hu, founder and chairman of Primavera Capital, and began by asking him how renewed US-Iran tensions could affect Asia.
Asian economies have also proven to be quite resilient, not in part because of the various initiatives of energy transition underway. And a notable example is China itself, where China being the largest consumer of energy and the largest importer of crude oil in the world, and the biggest customer of Iran. So far, the impact has been fairly muted. That's because now more than half of the new power generation is derived from renewable sources, for the solar and the wind and the hydro and increasingly nuclear as well. So China has succeeded in building a diverse, resilient energy system.
This time last year, you said that China is down but not out. Since then, investors have been steadily piling into the Chinese market and the Chinese assets again. So what's brought about this change, even with the global market swings?
Well, first and foremost is China's sheer size, scale, and the opportunity set, right? So, when China emerged out of the pandemic, self-isolation, and where geopolitics still a big concern, but the markets wake up to see the opportunities in the Chinese economy. So start to warm up, and then last year, Hong Kong recaptured the crown as the biggest IPO market in the world. So with just more companies, new generation of tech, innovative companies come into the public markets, that obviously has captured global investors' interest. So capital start to flow back to the region. I wouldn't say it's a tidal wave, but it's definitely a sharp reversal from the capital outflow we saw a couple of years ago.
From a private equity perspective, where are the more attractive opportunities in China right now?
Well, it's not just single one. I think it's a broad array of opportunities in the private equity space. From AI, we already talked about it, right? To robotics, to biotech, and even to consumer and services. I wouldn't say China is cheap, but definitely, all the entry valuation multiple is still half of the US, so that makes China very compelling. So there's a lot of interest and there's a lot of opportunities depending on your specific strategy.
At the same time, Beijing is looking into restricting access and funding into its most advanced AI models to overseas parties. I mean, the Meta Manus deal was the catalyst to that. At the same time, Washington also restricting US capital into Chinese AI. Are we moving towards two permanently separated tech capital markets, do you think?
I hope not. Right? It's clear over the last couple of years, especially the Biden administration has introduced a variety of draconian rules restricting U.S. capital from investing in Chinese AI, quantum semiconductors. By contrast, China has not introduced similar reciprocal rules. This Meta Manus deal you refer to is not meant to curb international capital to access Chinese frontier AI model or lab, Rather, this is not just investment. This is actually acquisition, and without obviously going through proper channel in terms of communication, filing, and approval. Regardless what happened, I think it's unfortunate. It sends a wrong signal. So I hope this is an isolated case. As far as I could tell, China remains receptive to investment global capital into Chinese tech space.
Apple supplier Luxshare Precision Industry failing to impress on its trading debut on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange today. It's still the city's biggest listing this year. The Guangdong-based manufacturer raised about $3.1 billion, surpassing Victory Giant Technology's $2.6 billion listing back in April. Luxshare's debut is part of a wave of Hong Kong listings by Chinese tech and advanced manufacturing firms seeking funds for expansion and research. But market sentiment remains volatile amid a tech stock sell-off and renewed geopolitical tensions. Now, Luxshare was one of 7 Chinese companies to debut on the HKEX main board today, with all posting lackluster performances. Analysts say investors are becoming more cautious about richly valued companies and the outlook for AI, following the recent pullback in chip stocks.
5 of the IPO listed on Wednesday, actually one of them already dropped below their IPO offering price. That means even they received like a very huge oversubscription, like a few thousand times, but somehow investor take more closer look to their fundamentals instead of just pour all the money into the IPO market, just like lottery. It's not the same case anymore. But in terms of Luxshare, I think it's definitely a very competitive IPO, especially when we talk about the Apple supply chain. I think this is a good company in a long-term perspective.
The shares closed at $62.30 Hong Kong a piece. That's down nearly 1.6% after falling by as much as 9.6% during the session. Also hoping to cash in on the AI-related rally, a Chinese memory chip titan, CXMT, is entering the final stage of the country's most anticipated listing this year, when it opens its investor subscriptions next week. The chipmaker will offer some 6.7 billion shares, raising around $4.3 billion when it goes public in Shanghai. An over-allotment option would increase that offering to 7.7 billion shares, bringing fundraising above $5 billion. China's chipmakers are seeking to draw upon investor interest in the sector with an uptick in listings. CXMT produces DRAM chips, which is used by AI models to process data. It's the 4th largest DRAM maker in the world. Now, DRAM players have seen their stock value shoot up over the past year on the back of surging demand, but prices have remained volatile over the past week amid waning sentiment. Uniqlo owner Fast Retailing reported better than expected quarterly earnings for the March to May period, putting the Japanese clothing giant on track for a 5th straight year of record earnings. Revenue for the 3rd fiscal quarter came in at around $6.4 billion. That's up more than 20% on year, while net profit was up more than 39% to $925 million. Now, that's as the company weathered supply chain issues brought on by the war on Iran. The company drew most of its sales from overseas outlets, which grew more than a third at $3.7 billion, while sales in its Japanese stores was up more than a tenth at more or nearly $2 billion. The company's chief financial officer, however, warns that 4th quarter earnings may dip due to a weaker yen and that the current heat wave in Europe is negatively impacting consumer spending. Still, it looks set to overtake Swedish rival H&M in full-year sales to become the world's 2nd largest clothing retailer, behind Spain's Inditex, which owns Zara. South Korean stocks snapping a 3-day losing streak, signaling there's still room for the AI trade to run. That's after the benchmark fell into bear market territory yesterday, down more than 20% from a record close in late June. A big boost also from positive sentiment around SK Hynix's planned blockbuster US listing. The chip giant said to have closed its book building for its $28 billion offering for American Depository Receipts, or ADRs, with reports saying orders have already covered the books several times over. It is expected to set the final price of the offering today. The deal expected to be the world's second largest new share sale ever, trailing behind only SpaceX in offering size. SK Hynix is a key supplier of high bandwidth memory chips used in AI systems by customers such as NVIDIA and Alphabet's Google. The International Monetary Fund has sharply upgraded South Korea's growth outlook, saying the country's AI-driven semiconductor exports are outweighing the economic impact of the Middle East conflict. The IMF now expects South Korea's economy to grow 2.6% in 2026, up from an earlier forecast of 1.9%. It's also upgraded its 2027 outlook to 2.5%. The fund says strong global demand for AI semiconductors has powered exports, making South Korea one of the world's 4 biggest net exporters of AI software, alongside Taiwan, Thailand, and Malaysia. The stronger outlook echoes the Bank of Korea's own revised forecast, driven by robust chip exports, government stimulus, and resilient markets. South Korea's economy expanded at an annualized 7.5% in the first quarter, beating expectations as semiconductor exports offset higher energy costs. The brighter outlook has strengthened expectations that the Bank of Korea will raise interest rates at its next policy meeting next Thursday. And that'll do it for business. Back to you, Grace.
Thanks, Roland, for keeping us up to date on business news. And on that note, we'll go out for a short break. But coming up on East Asia Tonight, South Korea's former president loses another legal battle. The country's top court upholds charges against Yoon Suk-yeol as the fallout from his failed martial law bid deepens. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're tracking this hour. Deadly floods claim 39 lives in southern China, forcing thousands from their homes. Forecasters now tracking Typhoon Bavi as it heads for China's southeast coast. Extreme weather in South Korea as well. Torrential rain has triggered floods, forced hundreds from their homes, and disrupted transport across the country's central regions. Plus, South Korea and Mongolia are deepening ties with 21 new agreements being signed, including on critical minerals and energy. This as the countries look to strengthen trade and regional cooperation. America has accused China of giving too little warning before this week's ballistic missile test. The U.S. State Department says only a few hours' notice was given, and Beijing failed to provide enough details before the launch. The launch has drawn criticism from countries such as Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, which have all called for greater transparency. Beijing reacting today to Washington's comment, saying it has repeatedly emphasized the test was a routine part of annual military training.
中方及时发布了相关信息，事先向美国等进行了通报，体现了中国军队的开放和透明。美国作为世界上唯一一个真正用核的国家，也是拥有世界上最庞大、最先进核武库的国家，每年都组织核潜艇战略导弹发射，却对中国正常的导弹发射说三道四、指手画脚，这是典型的双重标准和霸权主义。
Chinese state media says the missile was the JL-3, China's most advanced submarine-launched ballistic missile. It's estimated to have a range of around 12,000 kilometers, putting the continental United States within reach from waters off China's coast. And the Pentagon says China has 6 nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, each capable of carrying up to 12 missiles fitted with multiple nuclear warheads. The launch comes as China continues to modernize its military while also expanding its nuclear arsenal. It also strengthens the sea-based leg of China's nuclear triad, adding to regional scrutiny over Beijing's long-term strategic intentions. Countries possessing a nuclear triad are able to deliver the devastating atomic weapons by land, by sea, and by air. It's meant to be a deterrent, as any adversary who failed to completely wipe out a nation's nuclear delivery systems faces the threat of retaliation. And Chinese President Xi Jinping has made establishing a powerful and effective strategic deterrent system a priority. That is, since taking power in 2012. Experts believe China is one of only 4 nations with a complete nuclear triad, alongside the U.S., Russia, and India. And China has demonstrated its sea-based capabilities on Monday, firing a nuclear-capable missile into the Pacific in the nation's first submarine launch missile test since the year of 1982. And, as mentioned earlier, analysts say China's sea-based projectiles have the range to reach the U.S. all the way from its shores. Land-based delivery systems, however, form the backbone of Beijing's nuclear triad. They are the most mature and capable element of its strategic deterrent. It includes a diverse arsenal of intercontinental ballistic missiles. That is a U.S. congressional report saying that is now shifting from liquid-fueled and silo-based to solid-fueled for faster deployment. That, combined with mobile launchers, makes preparations and launches more difficult to detect and target. And China's airborne leg of its nuclear triad is the least developed, relying mostly on its H-6 bombers. Experts say each can carry an air-launched ballistic missile with a strike range of up to 8,000 kilometers. Beijing is currently developing its next-generation H-20 bomber. That's expected to have a longer range and enhanced survivability. But its projected service entry date has been delayed into the 20s and 30s. Australian think tank ASPI says China's missile test on Monday in the Pacific represents a significant shift, confirming that Beijing's newer missile and submarine systems are operational and is one of the latest elements of a Chinese nuclear modernization and buildup that it calls worrying. New Zealand's Prime Minister Christopher Luxon says his country is considering joining a defense alliance between Australia and Fiji. Mr. Luxon says his country welcomes the pact, noting that close ties with Australia and Fiji make it logical to engage with them on the alliance. Canberra and Suva signed the Ocean of Peace Alliance on Monday, binding them to come to each other's mutual defense. Both nations have said other Pacific countries with militaries can also join the pact, and the agreement comes as Australia seeks to counter China's growing influence in the Pacific. The treaty was signed just hours before Beijing tested a long-range nuclear-capable missile that landed in the Pacific Ocean. And following New Zealand's comment, China's foreign ministry said security ties between countries should be open and inclusive. It added that such cooperation should be aimed at maintaining regional peace and stability. Elsewhere in the region, South Korea's top court has upheld charges against former President Yoon Suk-yeol that is linked to his attempt to impose direct military control over the government. Yoon's lawyers say they will seek a ruling from the Constitutional Court over the decision. The verdict on the ousted leader is the first by the Supreme Court, upholding a lower court's 7-year sentence for the ousted leader for obstructing justice by blocking investigators from detaining him in the wake of his martial law bid back in 2024. Yoon Suk-yeol is in jail serving multiple sentences over this failed attempt, including life imprisonment for insurrection. He's also standing trial in 8 other cases linked to his decree in December of 2024 that plunged the nation into a political crisis. Though the martial law only lasted 6 hours before lawmakers voted it down in an emergency session, the move sparked months of protests and even disrupted the economy. One of Asia's largest industry events, Spacetide, is underway in Japan as the country prioritizes the final frontier as a critical pillar of national security. CNA senior correspondent Michio Ishida has more.
Countries big and small are taking their space ambitions to new heights. Space conference Spacetide, hosted annually in Tokyo, drew participants from some 30 countries and regions. Here, Japan and Singapore space agencies signed agreement to strengthen collaboration in areas such as technology for the peaceful use of outer space. Japanese and foreign organizations also inked partnerships at Spacetide for the first time. Japan is increasingly eyeing space as a domain for national security as the global environment becomes more uncertain. And it's also accelerating partnerships with other nations, as seen at this space conference. As Japan's focus on space grows, this is giving a boost to Japan's commercial space sector.
Our government also just announced a long-term investment plan. So the space industry in Japan has been gaining momentum. So it generated a lot of attention from over the world.
SSC Space, a Swedish state-owned corporation, opened its Japan office in January as it sought to strengthen its presence here. And it's just inked several deals with local firms.
As SSC Space is growing in Japan and the region, Infostellar, who is well established and has a quite unique platform for reaching a lot of customers. Seiren, which is manufacturer of satellites and satellite platforms and building up constellations. They are a customer that fits very well with SSC Space.
Speed of the security demand is kind of incredible, and of course that's gives more sales opportunity for us.
The Japanese government has allocated more than 1.04 trillion yen, or about $6.5 billion for space-related spending this fiscal year. That's 12% more than last year. It's also aiming to expand Japan's space market to about $49 billion by the early 2030s, doubling from 2020. This is creating opportunities for space-related businesses outside Japan, such as Singapore firm Spectro.
Quantum technologies itself is a dual-use technology essentially, right? And especially coupled with the space and satellite technology. It can be applied for both commercial sector as well as defense sector, and we remain open to explore such opportunities with our strategic partners in Japan.
As Japan seeks to grow its global partnerships, the host of the first Singapore Space Summit held this February sees the prospect of more Japanese participation next year.
I think more will be coming. It could be in defense, they could be in something else, because really it's the underlying technology and then it's just the applications of what they want to apply to. So yes, we see going to be seeing a bigger Singapore Space Summit 2027.
Spacetide, a 4-day event, will end on Thursday. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
It's time for a short break, but we'll come back with more stories from East Asia tonight. What happens when AI sounds just like you? One Chinese voice actor says the technology is changing his career and blurring the line between humans and machines. A case of AI voice cloning has sparked discussion on Chinese social media in recent months. A well-known voice actor has claimed AI-generated versions of his own voice have become so widespread that some platforms are mistaking his real voice as being machine-generated.
冠军侯说我是中国历代武将可望而不可及的最高山峰。忘了。
Millions of netizens have heard Shen Anyu's distinctive voice. The voice actor has spent years narrating online videos, from film explainers to animation commentaries. 3 years ago, his voice was involuntarily cloned using AI. According to Chinese media reports, this has resulted in a loss of voice acting jobs, with his monthly income dropping to just 1/5 of what it was at its peak. Mr. Shen says he has repeatedly asked people to stop using his cloned voice, but to no avail.
在网络上证明我是个人都很难。这3年，我连告1个人的钱我都没攒下来。这3年发展出了多少我的 AI？ 我怎么去告？从源头上断不了，我的 AI 就会永久的传下去。
For more CNA's Rebecca Mateo joins us live from Beijing. Rebecca, this story has captured a lot of attention, but why has Shen Anyu's case struck such a chord with the public?
That's right, Grace. As you mentioned, this story about the voice actor Shen Anyu went viral earlier this week on Chinese social media platform Weibo. And that's really because, that sparked a wider discussion on AI voice cloning. So many netizens expressed their sympathy for him, and they simply found it ridiculous how he still has to prove that he's a real person after AI copies of his voice was spread so widely online. And something that the netizens brought up was that, those in the creative industry really are facing a much broader challenge, especially, as technology catches up and that AI seems to be able to replicate their work so much more easily. But the conversation wasn't exactly about being against AI. People know that AI is the future, it's here to stay, but what they're really asking for are better rules and better protections for people like Mr. Shen. And in fact, from the things that I've read online, I know that Mr. Shen is not the only one or the first one who had such an experience. And I think this is going to become a bigger issue down the road because already we are seeing AI-generated voices all over Chinese social media platforms. They are being used in microdrama, storytelling, as well as even knowledge-sharing videos.
Definitely. And as you mentioned, AI is here to stay, but finding how we can adapt with it is another question. And it seems like you've tried this AI voice cloning app yourself. So how convincing was it?
So, Grace, Mr. Shen's experience really got me thinking. And, AI voice cloning technology has gotten so much more advanced in recent years. So some simply generate a speech from text, while others create digital copies of someone's voice just from a few recordings. And if you get the more advanced versions, you can even tweak the tone, the emotion, the speaking style, or even create avatars that look and sound just like a real person. So Chinese tech companies like iFlyTech, Baidu, Tencent, they also have AI speech abilities and also digital human technologies. And in fact, China is one of the world's most active AI markets, and according to the country's internet regulator, there are over 190 generative AI models registered for public use by 2024 with over 600 million users. So all this really got me thinking just how convincing this technology has become. So I did a small little experiment with one of the AI voice cloning tools available in the market, just because that was the most straightforward one to use. Let's take a closer look. Artificial intelligence is making it easier than ever to recreate someone's voice, so I will be putting it to the test. All I need to do is to upload a few short recordings of my voice to an AI voice cloning platform developed by a Shanghai-based AI company. It saves this as my voice. Then I will go to another page where I can tweak everything from the speed and pitch to the emotion. For example, I can highlight certain words, apply an emotion like happy, sad, or angry, making the voice sound even more natural. It's only been less than 30 seconds, and here's a digital clone of my voice.
您好，我想问问你，周末的时候你是比较喜欢待在家，还是出去走走呢？我自己如果有时间的话，还是喜欢出去逛逛，找一家咖啡店坐下来放松一下。那你呢？
I recorded the same script with my own voice, and next I hit the Beijing streets to put people to the test. 待会会播2个录音给你，一个是 AI 生成的，一个是真人的声音。想问一下，你分得出吗？
我认为一偏向于 AI。
为什么呢？
因为这个声音的频率和这个波状， 这个比较一致，比较有稳定性。
它那个语音语调非常的模板，就非常标准。有点太标准了，就我觉得每个人的就是多少都是有点自己的口癖。
哇，两端都很真，但是从那个语调语速来说，就是第一段更像 AI 吧。
跟咱们平常说话的感觉比较接近一些，它没有那个相当于固定的那个声音的那个，就是那个模子吧，就感觉。能感觉到像一个类似一个机器人这样的说的。
好的，其实第一段是真人，第二段录音才是 AI， 被骗到了是吧？
对，挺像的。
3 out of 5 people I asked could pick out the real human voice. But perhaps the bigger question now isn't just whether people can tell the difference, but what happens when they can't.
I mean, that was fascinating, Rebecca. It's very convincing as it picks up even the little human habits, including emotions. But China does have some of the world's strictest rules on AI-generated content. And you spoke to a lawyer on what the gaps are and what improvements may need to be there. So what exactly did the lawyer tell you that people can do about such fast-developing AI?
Yep, Grace, you're absolutely right on that. And I spoke to lawyer Typhoon from Zhonglun Law Firm, and he said that China actually already has a fairly comprehensive legal framework for AI-generated content and voice cloning, meaning that it has laws, regulations, as well as national standards in place. And for example, companies are in general required to label the content as being AI-generated so that users know that it isn't real. But he says that the bigger challenge really isn't the law. It comes down to enforcement because technology is moving at such a fast pace and simply regulators, the courts and police just can't keep up. So he said that the authorities really need to work more closely together to strengthen their technical expertise if they want to enforce these rules more effectively. Let's have a listen.
联合性执法还不够，我们能看到啊，就是比如说行政。法院和就特别是刑事，就公安、法院，就是三者一起联合起来的执法，其实在这个场景下是挺有必要的，因为我们知道大量的 AI 的伪造，对 AI 的这种深度伪造，其实衍生了很多诈骗案件，可能每个执法机关对于相应的技术啊或者这个理解还都不一样，因为确实变化很快了。
But as for the voice actor, Mr. Shen, Mr. Tsai says that China has seen several lawsuits involving AI voice cloning, but these cases are particularly challenging because the burden is on the voice actor to prove that the AI-generated voice infringes his rights, and that will be a tough battle to fight. Let's hear from him.
即使我拿到了这个他侵权的这样的一个。 声音对吧？和我自己声音做比对，这是另外一个路径。但是这个路径的话，问题是现在在司法鉴定层面上，其实是没有一个非常具有规范性或者是公示性的这样的一个标准。就我以什么标准来去做这个司法鉴定？我到底是以声纹为标准呢，还是以这个语音语调为标准呢？
Right, though this report may have started with the well-known voice actor in AI cloning, it's now widespread in China. So you've spoken to some people there. Are they embracing such AI-generated content, or are there more concerns about where the evolving technology is heading to?
That's right, Grace. So I also spoke extensively to the people you saw earlier in that story. And what I've heard from them is that AI-generated content seems to be very much part of everyday life already. So the people here watch a lot of micro-dramas, otherwise also known as Guangxi. And these micro-dramas, some of the scripts have been written using AI, while some of the micro-dramas have been produced using AI actors, AI voice. And what people are telling me is that they don't mind if this microdrama has been produced using AI actors and AI voice. What matters more to them is the story plot. But they do know where to draw the line, and that's when they are looking out for critical, important information. That's when they'll be more wary about AI-generated content. Let's have a listen.
短剧还好，就是一些什么科普啊，那种东西全部都用 AI 的话，其实大众有点难以分辨真假。
我觉得其实 AI 制作的这些，比如说像短剧还有动画，其实还是那个没有办法替代，就是真的大家一帧一帧画出来的动画，你可以明显的感觉到其实。
我认为比较接受不了的，主要是因为这个故事本身可能不符合我的胃口。AI 时代这个 IP 的价值是得到了这个很大程度的彰显和拓展。
So people do recognize the challenges ahead, especially the impact that AI and technology will have on the creative jobs. So it's definitely something to be watched as China goes big on AI and technology in the next phase of its economic development. Grace.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for that extensive report on AI evolving in China. Thank you for reporting live from Beijing. And for all our viewers, that's all we have for Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget headlines anytime at cne.asia, plus we're on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.